I'm Rick, and this is my wife, Raina. We're both 32 years old. We've been married almost 5 years. We'll be married 5 years this coming May 2015.
Before we were married, I was a saver by nature, but I never had an established budget. So I didn't know where the money was going all the time.
I was a spender. I would buy things with credit cards, and I amassed a sizable credit card debt and didn't really have much to show for it. In my early college years, I was actually lucky enough to win a brand new $23,000 vehicle at a local shopping mall in a contest. And I was actually not even satisfied with it. After about 6 months, I decided to trade it in on a used vehicle because I thought that was cooler. And it was a very poor decision, and that continued for a number of years into my college years, just buying things that never really satisfied me.
So coming into marriage, I brought about $27,000 worth of student loan debt. Private college is not cheap.
I had about $6,000 in school loans and about $5,000 or $6,000 in credit card debt.
Credit card debt, that was scary for me, and it was definitely a fear trigger.
I think I would always try to convince her to buy the bigger, better thing, the more innovative tech tool, or bigger TV, newer car, fancier car, anything that would make me happy, not really considering how she felt. And we would always argue about why we're spending this on this and why we're spending that on that. And it was always a stressful situation, especially with large purchases. We weren't really sure if we were making the right decision.
Well, good morning, everybody. So good to have you here today on all three campuses. And let me just say a big thank you to Rick and Raina for opening up their lives and sharing a part of their story with us. Sometimes it's just encouraging to hear someone else's story and to know that you're not alone, that other people struggle as well. In fact, if you've ever made a financial mistake in your life, do you know what that makes you? That makes you older than 12 years old, because we've all done that. So today we're beginning this new series called Strapped, because I believe that if there's one word that could describe how most Americans feel when it comes to money, it would be this word. That most Americans, I believe, feel tied down emotionally, financially, spiritually. They just feel strapped. And the funny thing is that we live in one of the wealthiest nations in the world, and yet in spite of that, so many people still struggle with this area of life. The statistics really tell the story. A recent study says this: 79% of Americans say that their personal finances keep them awake at night. In fact, in this same survey, they asked about all the things that keep people awake at night, and there was nothing even close to this. The next closest thing was family problems at like 9%. 60% of Americans say they experience high levels of financial stress, and more than half of all divorces are the result of financial tension in the home, meaning that if you're married, the greatest threat to your marriage isn't problems with your in-laws or, disagreements about sex or challenges with your kids. The greatest threat to your marriage is money. See, some of you can look at those statistics, though, and you can see yourself there. They tell your story. Because you've been awake at night thinking about the finances. You worry how you're going to cover all the bases. You and your spouse argue about this on a pretty regular basis. And you're not the only one who feels that way. So many people are right there with you if you feel that way. And it's not just poor people who feel that way either. I mean, I've talked to people at every income level who just feel strapped down and stressed out and burdened by the challenges of their finances. And that's why I'm excited about this series. I think this series has great potential for change in our lives collectively as a church and individually as people. And I believe that this could be a turning point for many, many people. And as we begin, I want to give you an important principle that applies not just to the realm of our finances, but to so many areas of life, but it's foundational to what we're going to be talking about in the next few weeks. And it's this: you never drift to the right destination. In fact, you may want to write that down on that connection card. If you write down nothing else, write this down. You never drift to the right destination. In other words, you won't end up in a good place by accident. You've got to be intentional about it. You've got to choose it. And this principle, as I said, is true in every area of life, but I think it's especially true in the area that we're talking about now, in the realm of our finances. Because if you just allow yourself to go with the flow of culture, that is never going to take you to the right place. You're going to find yourself stressed out, strapped down, and flat broke, I guarantee it. You never drift to the right destination. So today, as we begin this series, we're going to talk about some of the intentional choices that we need to make. We're going to talk about some very, very practical principles of managing what God has entrusted to us in a way that will lead us to a very good destination. And for some of you, the stuff that we're going to talk about is not really anything new. Some of you already live by these principles, so today may just be a reminder and an affirmation of what you're already doing, and there may be some things that you need to adjust or tweak a little bit. But for others of you here today, what you need to hear today are principles that have the potential to change your life. And if you are willing to put them into practice and to pursue God's design for this area of our lives, I believe that you could change your life, change your family, and potentially even change generations to come. But if we allow ourselves simply to drift with the flow of culture, we'll never get to where we should be. So, as a way of introducing this talk, let me just give some really foundational, basic principles about money. And there are 5 ways, essentially, that we spend money, 5 ways that we use money. And this isn't rocket science. I think if you thought about it, all of us could come up with this. But with every dollar you get, you do one of 5 things. You spend it, you repay debt, you pay taxes, you save it up for the future, or you give. Okay? Every dollar you spend could fall into one of those categories. Everything else is probably a subcategory of these 5 categories. You either spend it, you pay down debt because of stuff you've already bought in the past, you pay your taxes, or you save for the future, or you give. Now, we're not going to talk a whole lot about taxes because taxes are just taxes. There's not much we can do about that, so we're not going to focus on that today. But I do want to focus on those other 4 words. I want to talk about how we spend, how we borrow, how we save, how we give, because the way in which you do those 4 things will determine where you end up in your financial world. So we're going to talk today about 4 habits. 4 habits that we need to intentionally pursue so that you never find yourself strapped. Now, we're going to focus today on the book of Proverbs, and we're going to try to learn from the scriptures in the book of Proverbs, which is in the Old Testament. And Proverbs really is just a collection of wise sayings inspired by God that apply to almost every area of life. The book of Proverbs is really just a book about life management. And by the way, there are 31 chapters in the book of Proverbs, and I think a really great spiritual discipline is to read through the book of Proverbs, 1 chapter per day for a month, and do that every month for a while. Chapters 1 through 30, chapters 1 through 31. If you do that month after month, you're going to have a PhD in wisdom, I guarantee it. But today we're going to pull out verses from the book of Proverbs, Proverbs that address principles of financial wisdom and 4 habits that all of us need to pursue consistently. Number 1 is this. Habit number 1 is to spend cautiously. To spend cautiously, which is kind of the opposite of what we hear every day in our culture. But see, this is where we have to begin. Because if we're not able to control how we spend money, then that has a ripple effect into every single area of the financial realm. You see, people who do not spend cautiously oftentimes end up deep in debt. And people who do not spend cautiously usually aren't saving for the future. And people who don't spend cautiously never experience the joy of being generous with God and others. So the way that we spend really is where we have to start. This is where we have to get a handle. And by the way, overspending is a universal problem. It doesn't matter how much money you make. You can still outspend your income. You know, sometimes people will say, you know, I'd be okay financially if I just made more money. Usually that's not true. It's usually not an income issue. It's usually a wisdom issue. You can always outspend your income. And so if you're not living within your means right now, you're just going to keep doing that just with more zeros behind it. Like Mike Tyson. Do you remember the heavyweight boxing champion, Mike Tyson? Mike Tyson, I don't know if you remember this or not, he declared bankruptcy in 2003. But do you know how much money Mike Tyson made in the 10 years leading up to his bankruptcy? He made $300 million, and he spent it all. See, any of us can live beyond our means. We all need to spend cautiously. This is what Proverbs says about this. Proverbs chapter 25, verse 28, and this applies to all of life, but certainly applies to what we're talking about today. It says, like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. Now, in those days, the primary defense for any city was the city wall, and once the wall was breached, the war was pretty much over. The battle was pretty much over. The city would definitely fall eventually. And the idea here in this verse is that when you have no self-control, you're like an undefended city. And in our culture today, that is really not a good thing, because every time you turn on a TV set, every time you log onto the internet, every time you open a magazine, you're going to be bombarded with advertisements that tell you that you don't have enough, that you need to upgrade, that you need to replace, that you need to catch up with everybody else. We are surrounded by these voices every day that tell us not to spend cautiously, but to spend immediately and to spend recklessly. And so we live in a culture, really, where shopping has become a recreational activity, where when we buy things, we don't just buy things that we need anymore. We buy things try to fill sometimes a void in our hearts and in our lives. It's almost a form of therapy in our culture today. And if you allow yourself to drift, that's where you're going to end up. Listen to this verse from Proverbs as well. Back a few chapters, chapter 21, verse 17, it says, "He who loves pleasure will become poor. Whoever loves wine and oil," which were the luxuries of that day. Wine and oil would be like, caviar and a BMW today. "Whoever loves wine and oil will never be rich." Now, read that carefully. It doesn't say that it's wrong to enjoy some of the pleasures and luxuries of life. It says the person who loves pleasure will become poor. The person who loves wine and oil will never become rich. It's describing the person who's never content, who cannot live within his or her means. The person who's always focused on the next thing, the next outfit, the next upgrade, the next vacation, just never satisfied, don't have a sense of contentment. So, how do you spend cautiously? I want to tell you 3 strategies that I've found to be very helpful. Strategy number 1, if you want to spend cautiously, number 1, have a plan. Have a plan. Now, another word for this is the word budget. I hesitate to even use that word, though, because the word budget sometimes sounds really scary because it's complicated and restrictive in the minds of some people. But a budget really is simply a plan. It's planning ahead of time where your money is going to go instead of wondering where your money went. It's spending your money on paper before you ever spend it out in the real world. Again, listen to the words of Proverbs. This is in chapter 21 and verse 5. It says, what's the next word? Second word in the verse? "The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty." You need a plan. See, you would never build a house without a blueprint. And a budget is simply a blueprint for your financial house. Does it take a little bit of work? Yes, it does. Does it take a little bit of discipline and self-control? Yes, it does. Does it mean paying attention to detail sometimes? Yes, it does. And here's what we all think. We think financial freedom is just being able to spend however much money I want to, whenever I want to, because that's what rich people do, right? No, it's not. I read a book years ago called The Millionaire Next Door, and the premise of this book is that most of the millionaires that exist in the world today are people that you wouldn't look at and guess that they're millionaires because they live fairly humble lives, and they got there and they stay there by watching their dollars and their cents. And in this book, they surveyed a whole bunch of millionaires, and more than half of the millionaires they interviewed still kept a budget from month to month because they understood something, that if you don't have a plan, you're going to drift. And when you drift, you never drift to a good destination. So number 1, if you want to spend cautiously, come up with a plan and stick to it. Number 2 is this: use cash. That's the second strategy. Because when you pay cash for everything, believe it or not, you will spend significantly less money because you feel the impact of spending cash far more deeply than you feel the impact of spending money on a credit card. That's just the psychology of credit. See, when you swipe that credit card through the card reader, you don't really feel much. There isn't any emotional tug. There isn't any pain when you do that. But when you've got to peel off some greenbacks and hand those over, well, that feels a little bit different. That's a little bit harder. And so we always spend less when we spend cash. I don't know if you knew that or not. McDonald's actually did a study on this, and McDonald's, the restaurant, fast food chain, they discovered that customers spend 47% more when using a credit card than when they spend cash. And here's why. Yeah, I think I'll have the apple pie also, and you might as well, supersize it. And hey, I'll pay for you too, because it's easy. You don't feel that. But when you're having to pay with real money, then it's like, yeah, you're on your own, and I'll take the dollar menu. So use cash. Let me give you a glimpse of just my personal financial world, the way that Debbie and I do some things. We have certain categories in our family budget where we use cash. A lot of stuff is paid online or by check, but in areas where we have to spend in a store, a lot of times we use cash, and we have what's called the envelope system. So for the money that we need for groceries and household expenses, we have an envelope for that. We each have an envelope for personal spending money. We have another envelope for entertainment, like movies and eating out. And here's how the envelope system works. Every week, I refill the envelopes with an appropriate amount of money. And then when you want to spend money, here's what you do. You go get the envelope and you open it. If there's money in there, you can spend. If it's empty, you can't spend. Let me explain that again, because I know that it's complicated. Here's how it works. You open the envelope. If you see money, you can spend. If you don't see money, you can't spend. Okay? Money you can spend, no money you can't spend. See how that works? Kind of old school, but it works really, really well. So if you want to spend cautiously, number one, have a plan. Number two, use cash. And number three, here's my third strategy. I do what's talking myself down. You sometimes when you're negotiating a deal, here's what you do. You try to talk the other person down. If you're spending money, one of the best things you can do is try to talk yourself down. And here's what I mean by that. You begin asking yourself questions like this. Is that a want or is that a need? Now, there's nothing wrong with spending money on a want. You can spend your money for something you just want, but just be honest with yourself about it. And by the way, if you are strapped, you should be spending your money on things you need first and maybe putting off some things that you want. But you begin to try to talk yourself down, or you say this, do I need it now, or can I wait till it goes on sale? Do I need the designer label, or will the store brand suffice? Do I need to go to Macy's, or will Goodwill be good enough? Do I need to buy it new, or can I buy it used? Okay? So you have a plan, you use cash, and then you talk yourself down. And that's how you spend cautiously. Now, that's habit number one. That is so important. Now, if you don't figure that one out, here's what happens. If you don't spend cautiously, if you overspend, eventually, how do we as Americans fill the gap between our income and our lifestyle? How do we make up for that? Yeah, that's called debt. Because there are some things in life that money can't buy. For everything else, there's MasterCard, right? So the second habit that you need to follow consistently if you're going to get to the right destination is this: borrow rarely. Borrow rarely. Now let me apologize right up front for being so un-American. Because let's admit it, living on borrowed money is assumed to be the only way you can live in our culture this day. And it's become so easy. I mean, I can walk into Best Buy and sign my name and walk out with a home theater system. It is so simple and so easy and so painless. I can walk into a dealership and buy a new car with nothing but my signature. It is so easy. And in our culture today, you can very quickly drift to the point where you're under a pile of consumer debt and you are strapped down. And so you have to be so disciplined about this. Let me give you a few statistics on debt in our culture today. The average monthly payment on a new car loan today is $471 a month. Now, that may not surprise you, but that shocked me when I read it. Number one, because I don't have a car payment. Debbie and I don't make car payments. We pay cash for cars, which means we buy really old cars, but we don't have car payments. But I never realized that people would pay $471 a month to get from point A to point B. But then think about this. If you were to take $471 a month and invest it in a decent mutual fund from age 30 to age 70, you would retire with over $5 million. So when you're ready to go out and buy that new Tahoe to impress all your friends, just understand that might be a $5 million decision. But we don't even think about it that way because it's so natural to just borrow for everything. Here's another statistic. There are 5 active credit cards for every man, woman, and child in the United States. 5 per person. And most adults get theirs, the vast majority get their first credit card when they are in college, when you don't have a job. But as if that weren't bad enough, credit card marketing is now targeting younger and younger audiences. A few years ago, Bank of America began offering a new credit card. It's called the Hello Kitty credit card. And what you do is you open the account, and then you can get a card with your daughter's name on it. And one of the corporate executives who came up with the idea said this. He said, in the future, we think our target group will be from 10 to 14, although it could certainly go younger. So we're creating little shopaholics before they even get out of middle school. Here, let me give you one more statistic. The average American household has right now almost $16,000 in credit card debt and pays about $1,800 annually just in interest charges alone. Now, I don't know in this church how many average families we have, but I started doing the math on this, and I thought to myself, and I added up the number of families we have who attend the church on a regular basis, and if every family was paying $1,800 a year just in interest on credit card charges, if we could stop paying interest to MasterCard and Visa and give that to the work of God's kingdom, if we were to pool that together, that would be $3 million a year just on interest paid on credit cards. Can you imagine the impact we could make in our communities and all over the world if we would just stop paying interest and take that money that we wouldn't miss anyway and give that to God? So, what does the Bible say about debt, about borrowing? Well, let me be honest with you. You won't find anything in Scripture that says it's a sin to borrow money. It's not a sin issue. It could be a stupidity issue, and it's definitely a slavery issue. Listen to Proverbs 22:7. It says, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. And that verse is simply stating a fact, like birds fly, fish swim, and the borrower is servant to the lender. It's just a fact of life that when you go into debt, you surrender a slice of your freedom. And it's not just financial freedom, it's emotional freedom as well, and spiritual freedom as well. That's why it's called MasterCard, because the borrower is servant to the lender. And some of you live here. You understand this. You feel the stress. You know the constant pressure trying to keep all the balls in the air. You dread opening the mail because you're dreading seeing another collection notice. Or maybe you wish you or your spouse could stop working and just stay home and raise your kids, but you can't because you're a servant. Because the borrower is servant to the lender. And even non-Christians, even non-Bible believing people understand this principle. Every year, Forbes magazine puts out one issue with the 400 wealthiest people in America. And one year in their 400 wealthiest issue, they surveyed everyone about the most important key to becoming wealthy. 75% of them said this, that getting out of debt and staying out of debt is the key to building wealth. They're just restating what Proverbs says, that the borrower is servant to the lender. So let me encourage you to do this. If you're in debt, stop. Okay, just don't dig the hole any deeper. Get rid of your credit cards, get a debit card. A debit card will do everything a credit card can do except get you in trouble. And then get out of debt as quickly as you can. Attack it. Get an extra job if you need to get an extra job to work it off. Sell some stuff if you can sell stuff. I mean, clean out your attic, put it on eBay, put it on Craigslist, start selling stuff until your kids get scared that you're going to sell them. Attack the debt and get rid of it. Now, if you've got some consumer debt and you want to get rid of it, I want to tell you about a great way to do that. Years ago, I came across an idea in a book by Dave Ramsey. It's a system he came up with called the debt snowball, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. But rather than me trying to explain it to you, I want to show it to you. So just watch the side screens. This is the debt snowball.
When I was a kid growing up, I used to love being out in the snow, playing in it, having snowball fights, building snowmen, whatever. Now, as any kid can tell you, there are two ways to build a snowman. You can grab handfuls of snow, build him from the ground up like a nincompoop, or you can roll a small snowball around the yard and before you know it, voila, snow torso, then lather, rinse, repeat, and add 2 sticks and a carrot. Dave Ramsey's philosophy of the debt snowball works on the same principle. You can try to eliminate your debt handfuls at a time, or you can allow your debt payments to snowball and you can beat your debt down like that pleated high water wearing clarinet player after gym class. Here's how it works. Step 1 is to find $200 in your budget that isn't designated for anything. How will you find $200? That's entirely up to you. Sell something, sell anything you don't need, like your weightlifting set or your Monogram Polydine Diabetes Baking Kit. Maybe you need to eliminate your cable TV, dining out, or your $4.50 a day morning dose of price gouging, disappointingly tasteless caffeine. Now that you have that, your next step is to list all your debts in increasing order of how much you owe. In this example, we have $450 owed to Lowe's for the new grill that you just had to have. $650 for Target for your shoes, your belt, and your purse, the essential matching set, and your flat screen TV. Then there's a $1,600 you owe to your parents for that time your transmission went out on your sweet vintage 98 Accord, and so on. Make a list of all the debts you have, lowest to highest. The next step is where the snowball starts. We're going to pay the minimum payment on all the debts, for now, except the one with the smallest balance. For the Lowe's card, we'll pay the minimum payment of $50, plus the $200 that we found. So guess what? After 2 months of paying $250, your Lowe's debt is gone. Next, we'll take that $250 you were paying Lowe's and snowball into the minimum payment of your Target card. So now we are paying $280 a month, and after a couple more months, just like magic, your Target card is paid off. You continue this process each time, snowballing your old payments into your new payments like Buddy the Elf. And before long, all your debts are gone. Now, an important thing to note is that during this process, you have to keep the snowball rolling for it to work. So no matter how much you love that new Urban Outfitters overpriced dress, or the toolbox, or that new TV to replace the one you smashed in a fit of anger after stupid Kobe missed that stupid game-winning free throw after, oh my goodness, why do the Lakers suck so bad this year? You have to wait. The debt snowball is the fastest, most effective way to tackle a lot of debt and pay it off quickly. Using the examples we had, if you were to pay the minimum balance on all the loans you had, it would take you 120 months before the debt was paid. That is 10 years. 10 years of playing Jean Valjean to the bank's Inspector Javert. But if you use the debt snowball, you can have all these debts paid off in just 21 months. That's less than 2 years. That's 99 more months of freedom. And additionally, if you take that $1,100 that you were snowballing and invest it at 8% interest for those 99 months, you'd have $153,000.
Whatever it takes, I don't know what it takes for you, but just do whatever it takes to get rid of that debt. So habit number 1 is to spend cautiously. Habit number 2, borrow rarely. And habit number 3, save consistently. And again, this is such a weakness in our culture. Only 32% of Americans would be able to cover a $5,000 emergency without going into debt for it. In the wealthiest nation in the world, it's no wonder that 79% of people can't sleep at night thinking about their finances. Listen to what Proverbs says about saving consistently. Proverbs 21:20, "In the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil, but a foolish man devours all he has." In other words, if you just consume everything that you get, you are, in the words of the Bible, a fool. It is the wise man who does not spend everything he earns, but sets some aside for future needs. There are 2 kinds of savings that I believe we all have to do. I would call it if savings and when savings. If savings are those unknown, unplanned events that may come up in the future, like you lose your job or you have a health crisis. Those are the things that can really set you back for a long, long time if you're not prepared for them. Even smaller if events, smaller unplanned events like the roof starts to leak or the furnace goes bad or your kids need braces, whatever it is, be prepared by saving for those things that are unplanned but could happen. Then the other category is when savings. Those are the things that you know eventually are going to happen. Like you know that eventually you're going to need another car. You know, you could actually start saving for that ahead of time. You may want to retire someday, and you could start saving for that ahead of time. I have 2 daughters. I'm assuming that someday they may fall in love and want to get married, and they're going to turn to me for some help on that. And I've seen TV shows like Say Yes to the Dress. I know that weddings aren't cheap, so that's a when savings that I've got to prepare for. So a few years ago, my wife took a part-time job, and everything she makes goes into a bank account for my daughter's weddings someday. That's when savings. There's if savings and when savings. And if you don't get disciplined about that, when those ifs and whens show up, you won't be prepared for them. And then what happens is we have to borrow in order to cover those things and just find ourselves deeper in debt. Here's how you prepare. Here's how you save. Proverbs 13:11. I love this. It says, dishonest money dwindles away, but he who gathers money little by little makes it grow. Little by little. It's kind of like, how do you eat an elephant? You can't eat an elephant all in one bite, but you can eat an elephant one bite at a time. And eventually, you'll get there. How do you save for those big unplanned or planned expenses? Just start early and stick to it. Do you know when the best time to start saving money is? 20 years ago. Do you know when the second best time to save money is? Start today. So even if you haven't done this so far, start doing that. Start preparing for the ifs and the whens of your future. So habit number 1, spend cautiously. Habit number 2, borrow rarely. Habit number 3, save consistently. And habit number 4, and this one may sound strange to you, it's so counterintuitive, but it is so important. Habit number 4 is this: give generously. That giving is actually a part of financial success and freedom in the eyes of God. And again, in our culture, I'm not sure we do very well at this. The average Christian household right now gives 1.9% of its income to charitable causes. That would be church, Red Cross, Compassion International, whatever it is. On average, 1.9%. Not atheist households, Christian households. Now you go back to 1933. Back then, the average Christian household gave 3.3% of its income to charitable causes. And you may look at that and think, well, it's not too bad. 90 years, we've only gone down 1.4%. But remember that 1933 was at the height of the Great Depression. So as Americans, we were more generous during the Great Depression than we are now with all of our prosperity. And to me, this is absolutely mind-boggling, because I believe that Christians ought to be the most generous people on the face of the planet because we follow Jesus. And Jesus was the most generous person who ever lived. He spent his entire life giving and serving. And then his life ended in the greatest act of servanthood and the greatest act of generosity that history has ever seen. See, an ungenerous Christian is a walking contradiction. I believe that. An ungenerous Christian is a walking contradiction. We ought to follow Christ and live the way he lived. But when we do that, it's amazing what will happen. I want you to hear a couple of promises from the book of Proverbs here. Chapter 11, verse 25. It says, a generous man will prosper. That is so counterintuitive. You give money away, you're going to prosper. He who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. In other words, the generous person will be refreshed emotionally, spiritually, maybe even financially. See, here's the thing. God doesn't need our money, but he knows that we need to give it. He knows because when we are generous, it begins to change us from the inside out, and we become better managers of everything else that we keep. Listen to this, Proverbs 3. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Now that was written in a day when they didn't have dollars and cents. Their economy was based on crops and livestock. And the first fruits was the first 10% of what they harvested. And the way it worked was this, that when they harvested their crops, they would take that first percentage and they would give that back as an offering to God. It was a tangible way of saying, God, we recognize this all comes from you in the first place. And we recognize that we wouldn't have anything if it were not for your grace. And so we acknowledge that you are Lord of our lives, not our prosperity. And so as a way of acknowledging that, we give this first small percentage back to you as a powerful, tangible way to express their love and worship. But then listen to the promise that goes with it. He says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops, and then here's what will happen. Your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Here's what that means. When we start to give, we invite God into our financial picture. And his supernatural involvement begins to change things, and everything else begins to fall into place. And some amazing things happen, I believe, when we become habitually generous people. For example, when we become generous, I believe it breaks the hold of materialism on our hearts. I think generosity is kryptonite for greed. And when you become generous, all the stuff of this world doesn't appeal to you as much anymore. And when we get disciplined with the first part of what goes out, we become a whole lot more disciplined with the rest of what we still have to manage. And when we become generous people and put God first and focus on him first of all, it just brings up in our hearts a sense of gratitude for everything that we have, and it gives us a sense of contentment, and we just live as different people. And I can't explain all of it, but Scripture says, and hundreds and millions of believers would vouch for the fact that when we become habitually generous people, when we put God first, it changes our whole financial picture. The way Debbie and I do that is we give online, and it's automatically drafted. As soon as I get a paycheck and it goes into my account, that giving comes right out the same day, so that it really is the first fruits of our effort. And I wish I had about 30 minutes to tell you all the stories of the way that God has blessed us as a family spiritually and emotionally and even financially as we've taken that step. So let me summarize. 4 things we all do with money. Aside from taxes, these 4 things. You spend, you repay debt, you give, you save, and you give. And that is the order in which most Americans prioritize. We spend, first of all, because it's me first, right? Then after we spend, we repay the debt from the stuff that we bought before. And then if there's any left over after that, maybe I'll put some in savings. And then maybe after I spend and pay debt and save, I'll be generous with others and with God. Now, here's what I believe. If we're going to live wisely, if we're going to be unstrapped, if we're going to move toward the right destination, we have to reverse those things. You give, you save, you repay, and then you spend. You honor God and invite him into your financial picture. You prepare for the future so you're not being irresponsible. You take care of any past debt that you're still carrying, and then you live on the rest. So I want you to think about these 4 words in this coming week and give some serious thought to this, and maybe even sit down with your spouse and pray about this and come up with a plan. And I just want you to think about your plan in terms of percentages. So if you were to take those 4 words, assign a percentage to them, like decide how much are you going to give. Not wait until you've got a little bit left over, but right up front, here's what we're going to give. For Debbie and I, as long as we've been married, more than 20 years, we've given away 10% of our income to God and other people. For you, you may not be at that point yet, but where are you going to start? 5, 6%? Pick a percentage. Then pick a percentage of how much you're going to save to prepare for the ifs and the whens of the future. And this is not your 401k that your company puts away for you. I'm talking beyond that. A good goal here is to save 10% of your income so that your future needs are covered, the ifs and the whens. For some of you, you ought to put 0 there, because you're already well prepared. You've got a lot of money in the bank and you're not saving anymore. You're hoarding, and so you ought to increase the percentage on top. Then number 3, figure out how you're going to pay off your debt. And then number 4 is spending. So here's how it works. You take the first 3 percentages, whatever you decide they're going to be. You add them up and subtract them from 100, and that's the percentage of your income that you live on. That's the percentage of your income that you spend on transportation, food, clothing, normal living expenses, and any other wild and crazy thing you want to do with the $5 that's left at the end of the month. You've got to have a plan, because you're never going to drift to the right destination. J.P. Morgan, one of the wealthiest men in the history of the United States, said it this way. He said, the first step to getting somewhere is deciding that you're not going to stay where you are. So my friends, wherever you are, if you're not where God wants you to be in this stuff, you just got to decide that you're not going to be there anymore. and come up with a plan and begin moving intentionally in the right direction instead of drifting. And I believe that if you do that, your life will be changed, your heart will be changed, and generations will be changed as well. Now, as a part of this series, we want to give you a free gift. What I've talked about today in the last 30 minutes is just really the tip of the iceberg in terms of helping you to get a handle on how to manage what God has entrusted to you. And it's so complex in this world in which we live today. So we are offering a financial learning experience. Here's what that is. It's a 2-hour seminar on Saturday, November 22nd, beginning at 10 o'clock. You've heard some of the details. And let me just say this. We've taken away all the excuses. We want you to be there. We want to see hundreds of people there. We're going to have a great time. We're going to have breakfast together, and then we're going to spend 2 hours together with an outside speaker who's just going to walk us through a workbook and some real simple material, but profound material to help us all get on the right page. Just go online where you can register at parkerhill.org/FLE. We want to see you there on November 22nd. You are all welcome. We got to hear earlier from Rick and Raina, and I want you to hear the rest of their story. Because about 3 years ago, they took a financial planning class here at Parker Hill Community Church, and then things began to change in their lives. And where they are today is just amazing. Listen to the rest of their story.
I think the turning point was that we, at one point, just wanted to have better sense of peace in our marriage, and to do that, I think we really need to handle our finances in a better way, not just randomly.
It's all God's anyways. We're, like you said before, Mark has said that we're just the temporary managers of it, and we weren't managing it very well, so.
I think God gave us a pretty good nudge. About 2 years into our marriage, we decided to take a financial planning class here at Parker Hill. We decided just to go all in and try to do the things that we were taught. We initially started an emergency fund to basically plan for any kind of emergency that would happen that we needed to account for financially. And then we took the next step of just
establishing a budget, which is something that we didn't have before. It's basically telling your money where to go.
Groceries, fuel for our cars, and dating. We definitely go on dates, and all that is important, and I think it really helps our communication because now we're talking about things and we're not as stressed.
We also attacked our debt. I would try to work whenever they offered extra time at work, and Rick did the same.
In the last 3 years, we've paid off $39,000 in all of our debt, including her loan, her student loan, my student loans, and credit card debt. And it's a huge dent that we put in our finances.
In 2 months, we're expecting our first child, and we're hoping to pass on the financial freedom and spending habits that we learned over the course of our marriage. We feel a lot more at peace and more prepared now that we have a financial plan in place.
We hope to even hopefully impact our children's children if that should ever happen, and hopefully we can just change the course of our family history and just try to teach them how to spend wisely, trust in God. My best advice would be to just attack the debt head on, whatever debt that is. Start small, and then definitely build momentum from there if you have the right financial plan in place, and be smart where you spend your money.
Take some work and some sacrifice, but it's well worth it in the end, and you'll have a sense of accomplishment once those debts start getting paid off. And it works.